Good evening, everyone. Welcome to Cherry Hill High School West and to our first Safety and Security Forum. For those of you who have not had the opportunity to meet individually, my name is Joe Malash, and I'm the superintendent here at the Cherry Hill Public School District. I'm grateful that you all have taken the opportunity to join us this evening for what we believe is a very important and very worthwhile conversation. As we go through this evening, I'm very excited to introduce Mrs. Judy Wilson, who is going to be our moderator. And as Judy goes through the evening, there's going to be questions and answers with our panel of experts who are up here on the stage. Before we begin, I do want to thank the support of the folks here at High School West for helping us to organize this, for Mr. Don Bard, who's our Director of Operations, for working out the logistics, and to the folks in the technology department who are assisting us with our live stream. This event is being live streamed and will be recorded to be used later as well. I want to recognize our board members who had the opportunity to join us this evening. First, Mrs. Lori Neary, who's one of our board members. Lori, thank you for coming. Mrs. Ruth Schultz, Mrs. Lisa Seidel, Mrs. Carol Matlack, and our board president, Mr. Eric Goodwin. So thank you all for being here, and I'm excited to turn it over to Mrs. Wilson.
Thank you, Dr. Malash. Good evening. The genesis for this forum comes from many different parts of the work throughout the school district. Certainly a national and regional topic that we've been paying attention to across Cherry Hill, but everywhere around the world for far too long now. The most recent work that came from a post-referendum analysis recommended a separate committee for safety and school security. And from that committee is the very specific recommendation to hold a forum to be able to meet several different purposes. And very specifically, they are to be current in the knowledge and understanding of best practices, to be well informed so that the next steps of decision-making in the district are sound and up to date, to provide parents with information that can guide them in their conversations with their children, both at home and as liaisons between the school and home, and to share the current work that's already in place in our schools, because sometimes that goes either unknown or unidentified to everyone across the community. In order to bring the very, very best information for the public's consideration and the board's decision-making, a very fine panel has been brought together this evening, and we're very, very grateful. The folks who are with us tonight have all volunteered their time to be with us. Only district employees are under contract at this time with the district. They bring a wealth of experience and expertise and the most current knowledge for us to consider and share. And so with a strong word of gratitude, I'd like to ask each member of the panel to introduce him or herself. Simply brief introduction with the role that you currently play or the association you have with an agency. So Mr. Gale, would you start us off, please?
Sure. My name is Jeff Gale. I'm with the New Jersey Department of Education. I'm the director of the Office of School Preparedness and Emergency Planning. Our office is responsible for training best practices across the state of New Jersey. We've been positioned with a School Safety Specialist Academy to achieve that, and I know we have at least one school safety specialist sitting at the table here tonight. So that's our role, and that's what we do from the department.
Good evening. My name is Darrell Williams. I am that school safety specialist. I work with the School Office of Preparedness and Planning Committee, and as my director stated, what we do throughout the state of New Jersey.
Good evening. I'm Jennifer DiStefano. I'm the Student Assistance Counselor at High School East and have been with the school district for 18 years.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Harry Green. I'm a clinical and forensic psychologist in the community. I'm a proud Woodcrest Elementary, Beck Middle School, and Cherry Hill East graduate, and my three children are following in my footsteps. And I'm in private practice where I do a variety of forensic tasks, including violence risk assessment and clinical tasks like treat adults and adolescents with mood and anxiety disorders.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Anthony Saporito. I'm the Director of Security for the Cherry Hill Public School District. Prior to my appointment here, I'm a retired Cherry Hill Police Department officer with 30 years experience.
Good evening. My name is Dennis Tully. I'm the president and co-owner of Ronin Security Solutions. I am a consultant, a security consultant, and not currently, as Mrs. Wilson said, under contract with the district, but I've done work with the district and many other districts in the past.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Bud Monaghan, and I'm the chief of the Cherry Hill Police Department. I've been with the department I just started my 25th year. I'd like to thank each and every one of you for coming this evening and taking the time out of your night to be here with us. Thank you.
Thank you very much, panelists. Over the course of the last couple of weeks, the district has solicited questions from the public. We're very grateful because many questions were presented. Many of them will be answered directly, specifically, throughout the course of the next 90 minutes. However, I want to stress that specific questions were also grouped under umbrella topics and themes so that we would be able to really answer as many as possible. If you submitted a question and you said like that wasn't addressed in the course of this evening, there will be an FAQ printed on the district website. And if you have not yet asked a question and would like to, for those present in the audience tonight, there are index cards available for you to write a question on, and they'll be submitted in the last third of the forum this evening. And if you're home and would like to submit a question, there is an open portal on the website so that you can go to the security heading tab and hit the open portal and submit a question that way as well. So we're grateful for the questions that have been submitted. We're going to have our panel of experts addressed by their particular strength and level of expertise in terms of what the questions are. We'll go through those pre-submitted questions first, and then, as I said, open it up to questions that you might submit via index cards throughout the course of the evening. And I think Mrs. Sugars or someone working with her will be able to collect your index cards in about an hour. There are some questions also that may not be directly addressed due to their sensitivity and the need for them to really be held and not made public. The responses are really not appropriate. And in terms of security and safety, that's information that cannot always be shared. So please understand that also. I'm going to ask Mr. Gale to start us off with a brief statement this evening, and then we'll move to the Q&A.
Okay, thanks. And I'm glad you stressed that because this is kind of unusual for a district to take this kind of a step in the interest of transparency, but there is a limit to some of the questions that really should not be answered in the interest of keeping the kids safe, which is why we're all here. So I want to thank everybody for coming out. This is important work that we do. It's been our focus in my office I've been doing this for 5 years. I've been with the Department of Ed for 8. I did investigations for a while there, and preceding that, I was with the New Jersey State Police for 26 years. There's a very different set of rules when it comes to school security. And so what we always have to try to remember as a community is that there is a balance that we're trying to strike in your schools between the issue of security and the issue of education and an open, free, stress-free learning environment. So I think it's easy to lose sight of this. I think everybody should try to take a breath and remember that every morning when your kids get out of your car to walk into this building, they have left the most dangerous activity that they're going to get engaged in for the day, driving with you in your car, to the safest place that they'll spend the rest of their time for that day. That statistically is a fact. They're much more likely, believe it or not, to be struck by lightning than to be harmed in their school in any significant way, especially with regard to a school shooting. But that doesn't mean that we don't still have a responsibility to pay attention to best practices and do what we can to make sure that our school is as safe and secure as it can possibly be. And that's been our drive for the last 5 years that I've been here. So wherever you leave tonight, whatever you take away from this, I think is important to understand a couple things. The first being that New Jersey is way in front of the rest of this country in almost every regard with regard to school safety and security. I was just in Washington, D.C. at the request of the Secret Service and USDHS on a threat assessment model for the country. I was out in Minnesota at the National Governors Association Conference. We participate and have been asked to speak out of New Jersey on a number of topics because we are really so far ahead. The true expertise, though, I will warn you, if my wife could have been here, we'd have had all the answers tonight, but she couldn't make it, so I'm going to do the best I can. But what we're trying to do is make sure that we afford all of that to our schools. Everything that we do costs nothing for a school district. We've been out and drilled in this district. We've looked at the security plans, your school safety and security plans. Your school district has been engaged in trying to get what knowledge they can and what expertise they can from our office. So I think it's important to remember that. This is a process. It's an ongoing process. It never ends. It's not something that I thought I'd ever spend a significant amount of time devoted to the safety of kids in schools, not in the context that we do today. So this is a process, and it takes the engagement of an entire community. That's a whole separate conversation about the parental contributions to this footprint, but I think it's important for everybody to remember that we're all continuing to try to move forward and elevate to the next level, whatever that might be in our particular school. And I did see some questions, and I'll end it with this. Understand that no district has the ability to say that there's a one-size-fits-all solution for security in the district. Every building is individual and unique. They have their own unique needs, and sometimes policies need to be adjusted. So you may see something being done one way in one of your schools, and it's not exactly replicated in another. That may very well be because of a funding issue or an initiative that's unable to get off the ground, but it also may very well be the result of a different need in that school, different age range, different physical structure, and so forth. So I'm going to end it with that, and we'll answer everything we can as transparently as we can, and thank you for coming out.
So just a brief follow-up on that, Mr. Gale. The overarching question that came from the public: do the Cherry Hill School District safety plans and protocols follow the state's best practices and recommendations?
So in having a look at the plan, which probably needs to be done in further detail, there's always something that we can do better, right? There's always a way that we can refine, and that's the reason that these plans need to be reviewed every year. But there is very strict guidance in New Jersey as to what those plans look like. There are 91 minimum required elements in a school safety and security plan by statute in New Jersey. They need to be looked at every year to be updated, and I did not see anything that fell out of the realm of those 91 required elements. So to that point, yes, can we always do better? Everywhere we can always move forward, but things are in line with what they should be statutorily.
Mr. Williams, the state has recommendations for lockdown protocols, and we know that our children on a regular basis follow those lockdown protocols. Can you just describe those for us in terms of what are the state's best recommendations?
Sure. First, I want to thank you for the question, and thank you, everyone, for coming this evening. Again, I think we all could be somewhere else on an evening like today, but we chose to be here because the most important thing, I think, for many of us is the safety of our school, our children, and the teachers and faculty work at those schools. When we talk about our lockdown protocols from a state direction, we work very closely with the districts throughout the state of New Jersey, and we work with them with their best practices and making sure that the implementation of their lockdown drills are what's best suited, like our director said, for their district. All districts are not the same. All buildings and schools are not the same, so we try to give them the best ideas after watching them and observing them doing their lockdown drills to say what do we think works best for them. And at the end result, it's up to the district to make those decisions and practices what works for them. Obviously, for the safety of the children in the school, the students, the parents, the faculty, we don't go into detail publicly what those exact protocols are. I mean, it's obvious for those reasons, but I will say that the drills and the protocol that we have in place, we've seen throughout the state of New Jersey, and even in here in Cherry Hill District, where we were here 2 weeks ago, the drills that they do and the lockdown procedures that they do, they're very effective. So as our director stated, they've met the points that they need to meet in reference to what we would say work for their districts, and they're different throughout the schools and throughout the district. So by and large, we work closely with them, and we watch what they do, and the best we do is recommend, because that's all we can do. And that, for the safety, we don't go into particular detail of what those particular protocols are.
We do appreciate the fact that you've been on site, though, and really observing the practices here at Cherry Hill firsthand.
Yes, again, I think it was 2 weeks ago, and we visited 2 of the schools, Cherry Hill East High School, and I'm not sure the other elementary school we went to, but we had an opportunity to, along with the Cherry Hill Police Department and the prosecutor's office and the staff, the principal and the superintendent, as well as teachers, to walk and observe an actual lockdown drill in their schools. A lot of times, teachers don't have the opportunity to visually see what a lockdown drill looks like because they're in a lockdown. So one of the things we do offer is to give them the ability to observe what they're doing in their schools. And 99% of the time, they come back with a different impression of what it is to actually see what goes into place in their district's lockdown. So it was very informative for them. What we saw, again, we felt was very effective for what takes place in the District of Cherry Hill.
Thank you very much. Mr. Saporito, as director, would you please share with us what the current security personnel staffing looks like, those who are stationed in our schools, and the type of training they receive?
Sure, Ms. Wilson, thank you very much. We in Cherry Hill here are unique with the security measures that we have in place when it comes to personnel. We are the only school district in the state of New Jersey that has a K through 12 police department. It's been around forever. In the early to mid 1980s, it was originally established for 2 officers in each high school, East and West. And at the time, they were not armed due to the feeling of not wanting to have weapons, no matter who has them, in a school building. And it was like that for years until we had the shooting occurred in Parkland. After that, there was a concern about not having weapons or officers armed in the school. Still 4. Over the years, it went from 4 or 5 down to 4 due to financial constraints. In early 2017, with the help of the board and Dr. Malash and Chief Monaghan, we armed the police officers that were currently in both high schools and hired the following summer during break 5 additional officers. Now, it's really important to distinguish that they are not security guards. They are not Class 3 police officers that work for Cherry Hill Township. They are sworn police officers that work for the district. Again, only one in the state. I confirmed that with the Division of Criminal Justice the other day because I was curious just to make sure it was a correct statement. There may be one other that may or may not still be in effect, but here we are. So with those 5 officers, we were able to staff all 3 middle schools. And again, with the help of Chief Monaghan, who has been indispensable during this whole process of forming here and expanding, he gave us a couple of marked police cars, and that allowed us the mobility for the 2 other officers that are left to continue to patrol our elementary schools randomly, each side of the town, and also the Early Childhood Center and the Malberg School in the Administration Building. The training that the officers get, first off, all of them, with the exception of 1, are retired police officers with a minimum of 25 years experience. One of the officers is a transfer from a municipal department and also a educational setting in the secondary or in the college education. They all have to go to SRO school, which is a school resource officer school. In Cherry Hill, they're called campus police officers because that's exactly what they are. They're working on our campuses. They have to go to a 5-day school in order to be certified. We work through that. It's not very easy to do that, to send the people there. It's all over the state, and it comes up every so often. They go to in-service training twice a year with the Cherry Hill Police Department to remain proficient in firearms and to go over any new laws or anything that would be important to their enforcement powers and to the overall law enforcement detail that they're doing in the schools. We train with the fire department. Just recently, every campus officer went to the fire department training for Stop the Bleed, for the use of tourniquets. God forbid if it ever came to that they would be trained to stop the wounds that would lead to death of someone. We train in incident command which is very important in any situation, especially large-scale situations, to make sure that everybody is doing the job that they're assigned. And we also have our own internal affairs component, and the officer that has been appointed to that is also being trained in a full school for that. And we just installed a resiliency officer that is required by the prosecutor's office to make sure that any officer within our department who's having any sort of issues can go to that trained officer to work through those.
Thank you very much. Dr. Green, turning to individuals, it's sometimes the case that the school district recommends or requires that a child be evaluated to see if there's a threat to his or her peers. Would you just give us an overview, please, of how an evaluator determines that?
Sure. So if I could make one broad distinction between, so one of the things that I do is forensic work, which is sort of task an evaluator with formally assessing someone's risk to engage in certain types of behavior, in this context, violent behavior. But most of the assessment that goes on in the community in circumstances like this are done by a variety of mental health professionals out there who are assessing a variety of risks that have been known to be associated with violence risk. So I'm going to speak mostly to sort of the formal assessments that I do and that are done in the community. But let me start with some good news and bad news in that regard. So the good news is that violence is pretty rare, which I think we could all agree. I mean, I send my 3 kids to Cherry Hill schools. The fact that violence is rare is a good thing. But as an evaluator, the fact that violence is rare creates a challenge. Behavior that occurs infrequently is hard to predict when and where. So, for example, if I ask people in what part of the country will there be a tornado in the next 6 months, we could all pretty easily come up with the Midwest. But since tornadoes don't occur frequently enough, it would be very hard to tell you when and where. So as an evaluator, as a forensic evaluator, what you're trying to do is look at the factors that are known to be associated with risk and then assess any one individual's status on those factors. So more formally, what you're doing is you're speaking with someone, but then you're also getting a variety of information about them, be it through the school, if they're on an IEP, do they have a disciplinary history? We've had some where we are able, usually through parents, to get their social media history, those sorts of things. And then sometimes there are opportunities to use some formal assessment techniques to be able to do that. Now, the challenge, again, is that because it happens infrequently, that most, and hopefully I'll have the opportunity later, perhaps not in this question because I don't want to gobble up too much time, but many of the folks that we evaluate do have some issues. Now, most of the folks who experience some of the challenges that I'll talk about hopefully later, most of those people don't go on to commit any violent acts. So it can be challenging, but what I would say broadly is sort of looking at historical, contextual, and protective factors that are related to risk and amelioration of risk would be how I would characterize it.
Thank you, Dr. Green. Mrs. DiStefano, most of the public is well aware of counseling services and general supports for students across the district, but are there programs in school that are specific to students who display at-risk behaviors?
Thank you. We do, students who display social and emotional behaviors that are happening within the classrooms, there is an intervention referral services team in each of our schools that teachers can refer students who are exhibiting behaviors that are inhibiting their academic success. So there are teachers that are on that team that will come up with a plan and intervention of some sorts to help the teacher with the behaviors that the student is exhibiting, and also they will contact the families to get some information and then hopefully see what plan that they can also help the families with in their homes and then also through school. And also through our guidance services, so guidance counselors that are in each of our schools and student assistance counselors that are at the secondary level. We all can help students that are exhibiting behaviors, either through seeing, the students doing some check-ins, helping them understand the behaviors that is going on, and then ultimately working with the families to maybe possibly get them some outside services.
Thank you, and I'd also like to thank Mrs. DiStefano for putting together this matrix, this description of what's available, particularly at each school within the district and at each level within the district. I think it's something that a lot of parents and community members are unaware of, the depth of services that already exist across the pre-K-12 spectrum. Thanks. So all the way at the other end of the table, Chief Monaghan, would you give us a brief overview of the working relationship between the school district and the police department, please?
Yes, ma'am, thank you. I would describe it as our relationship between the police department, the township, and the school district as comprehensive and intertwined. Director Saporito touched on some of the shared services and cooperation that we have between the police department and the campus police, but it also starts with my relationship and the police department's relationship with the superintendent. I meet with the superintendent on a monthly basis. We have each other's cell phone numbers. We talk if there's an incident, either late at night, on the weekends, and that relationship that we have has allowed many different programs to start in the schools with respect to allowing the police department in. When I first became chief in 2014, I would routinely get phone calls as to why a police car is outside of this school. Why is a police car outside of this school? And it was almost like panic would take place whenever anyone saw a police car in front of a school. And, now if I see something and say, why weren't the police there? I want the police there. And we've made this paradigm shift here where the superintendent has allowed us to come into the schools. We do directed patrols at the schools. In the last 3 years, our officers have been throughout the district, over 43,000 times they've been inside the schools. And that's not calls for service. They are strictly directed patrols where officers are tasked each day. We have 5 policing districts in the township, and the officers within their district are tasked with driving to a school each day within their district, randomly, calling out to police radio, getting out of their police car, and walking through the school. The purpose of that is to make sure that they can build relationships with the school staff as well as students within the school. And those relationships have expanded to different programs that the police department has put in place with the cooperation of the district. We have police clubs in each of our high schools. We also have a Run With Us, Not Away From Us campaign where we practice with Cherry Hill West track team and different sports teams in the school district. And we're in the process of embarking on a restorative practice program largely funded through confiscated funds and grants that the police department has acquired that touch on some of the behavioral issues that Ms. DiStefano had touched on, where we'll have police officers in the schools with different professionals that will focus on students who are having those behavioral issues in the schools to have early intervention prior to them going down a negative path in life, in hopes to give them ways to deal with anger or emotional problems that they have. So, I believe in a community policing model in general, in how we detail our officers throughout the town. And if you look at the size of this district, both with the student population as well as the staff population, both teachers and support staff in the schools, you're close to 13,000 to 14,000 people that are within our schools every single day. That's a town within itself. And if we don't have our officers inside the school building relationships, not just with the students, but also with the teachers, because we need to protect the teachers and the staff, and build those relationships, not just on a worst case scenario with a school shooter situation, but just general everyday needs of the community and the police to be able to have that interaction and have that cooperation, it wouldn't take place if we weren't allowed inside the schools. So, I give credit to the superintendent in allowing us to do that and allowing us to build those relationships, and it takes time for that to evolve. And we've gotten to a point where, I see students, just myself, because I participate in a lot of the different outreaches that we have. They recognize me if I'm in a store, even in plain clothes. And that's so important because that barrier is broken down. When you look at a police officer, there's barriers to who we are because we have the uniform on. And, when we first came into the schools, like I said, the kids, the students, even the teachers were like, what are you doing here? Now they walk up to our officers, they shake their hand, they're happy to see them. And if they don't see them, it's like, where are the cops? Why aren't they here? So, the cooperation has been extensive and intertwined. We're extremely excited to move forward with it. And again, it's about building those relationships and those connections to identify issues prior to them taking place and identifying students that might be at risk that we can deal with it sooner as opposed to when a situation unfortunately unfolds. Thank you.
We're seeing very strong strands about partnerships and relationships. And we mentioned earlier some of the requirements and best practices at the state level. Mr. Tully, I wonder if you would take us to a glimpse at the national level. We've learned that Cherry Hill schools are aligned with many of the state's recommendations. Are there recognized national best practices, and how would Cherry Hill's security and planned security to come match up with those?
Thank you, Mrs. Wilson. I'd like to start by saying, echoing something that Chief Monaghan said. I spent 26 years in the state police, 12 and a half of which I was in charge of our SWAT team, our teams unit. I worked with both the chief and Mr. Saporito, and I will say that the cooperation that I've seen in Cherry Hill Township between the school district and the police department is unparalleled in other school districts in which I've worked. So I'd just like to start by echoing those sentiments that the chief just said and that Mr. Saporito stated earlier about the police department here within the school system. With the amount of tragedies in this nation and throughout the world, I've been privy, as have Mr. Gale, Mr. Williams, and several others, to see the reports, attend some of the meetings to discuss some of the tragedies that have happened throughout this country. And there are common threads that come out of a lot of these tragedies. One of the best things that has happened is that people nationwide have gotten on the same page, and there is a concerted effort, New Jersey being absolutely at the forefront from what I've seen, but there's a concerted effort to have national best practices and national standards. And the Partnership Alliance for Safer Schools has really taken the bull by the horns. The acronym for that is PASS. You can look it up online. They have a multi-tiered set of guidelines, which have been cited by the Federal Commission on School Safety. It has been cited by the NFPA, and NFPA 3000, which is the active shooter portion of the National Fire Protection Association. It's been cited in the final report for the Marjorie Stoneman Douglas school shooting in Parkland, Florida. It is, as I said, a multi-tiered guideline and checklist, which really does dovetail very nicely with those of New Jersey. Now, you have to understand that when you're looking at best practices, Mr. Gale mentioned it earlier, but each and every district and each and every property within that district is treated differently, right? Each of them have their own characteristics. Each of them have their own personalities. Each of them have their own staff. But as a district, if you can be standardized and bring in these national best practices from an organization like PASS, and that's the best one that I found. It's the one that is cited most throughout the nation. It talks about concentric levels of security and tiers of security. So it starts at the district level. It works down to a property by property, perimeter level for security. And it makes recommendations and guidelines based on all this. It does parking lot perimeter security, building security, and building level security, then interior security, and right down to classroom level security. So, like I said, it dovetails very well, all of the tiers. There's first tier, which people at PASS and people nationwide believe that most of the tier 1 items should be employed by most school districts. Again, it's going to depend on where you are. If you're in an urban environment, if you're in a suburban environment, or if you're in a, the middle of the country somewhere, and response time to your school can be, like Mr. Gale and I spoke earlier, can be 2 hours to an Indian reservation in the middle of the country. Here in Cherry Hill, you have, I'm assuming, less than 2 minutes. With police officers in the school, you have well under probably 90 seconds. And so you have to take each and every school on a case-by-case basis. But to answer your question, Mrs. Wilson, yes, there are a national best practices, a set of best practices. And I believe that Cherry Hill, in the time that I was contracted to do a risk analysis of the district, they were doing a very nice job of fulfilling most of those, and they had plans to fulfill many more of the tier 1, 2, and 3 items that are on that list.
Chief Monaghan, what is the response time to the schools?
I would like to say as quick as we can get here. No, in all seriousness, our response time is probably, like Mr. Tully stated, less than 2 minutes, if not faster, depending on the school and the time of day. We have our assets strategically deployed throughout the township to ensure quick responses to any type of in-progress calls. We also have equipment that is deployed daily on the street in vehicles to address situations. So, it's not where an incident happens at Cherry Hill East and we have to come to the police station, which is on the west side of town, to get equipment and go back out there. So our officers are fully equipped, ready, and able to respond to any type of situation within the township. And Director Saporito touched on the training that we do just recently with the campus police, as well as the police department and the fire department. So the first responders within the confines of Cherry Hill Township work in that unified command structure under ICS, and we train on a regular basis to ensure that those responses are quick, timely, and that the equipment that is needed if a situation were to take place is rapidly deployed to the locations that we need to do it.
Thanks so much. Some of the questions that were submitted in advance from members of the public are very specific, and we're going to turn to a couple of those now. Mr. Gale, I think probably best to answer this question. Some of the feedback, especially post-referendum feedback, indicated that the installation of security vestibules in our schools was controversial. Do it, don't do it, this way, another way. Can you speak to current state recommendations on security vestibules, please?
I can, but first I would just say, to make everybody kind of take our rightful place here in New Jersey, the national average for law enforcement response to active shooter is 3 to 5 minutes, and you're going to be well under that. What Mr. Tully was referring to was a conversation we had outside where I asked that question of 300 school districts I presented to in Arizona last year, and I had people raise their hand and say 2.5 hours. I teach on a reservation in the middle of nowhere. And Mr. Tully also referred to the Parkland report. Every element of that report, all of the recommendations that came from that report, we've been training our schools in New Jersey on for 5 years. I didn't find one thing in that report that we haven't been doing here as a practice, a best practice here. So a lot of the national standards are really kind of falling in behind stuff that we're doing here. And I think that's something that everybody in the individual districts in the state should be proud of. With regard to the vestibules, so it is a question that would be easily answered if it didn't cost anything, right? Unfortunately, that's not the case. And I've been disappointed at how many schools I've visited across the state that actually have vestibules that don't use them properly. They have something that's very easy to achieve by simply putting in a couple of electronic locking mechanisms and don't take advantage of that. And I try to encourage those schools, if you're not going to use it, give it away to a school that wants it. It's a major disappointment. Our vestibules should be our gateway to our schools. The new legislation that came out about a year ago mandates that for all new construction, every school that is built in New Jersey from the date of this bill about a year ago going forward is mandated to have an access control vestibule with very specific security components as a part of that vestibule. And while it may seem burdensome and while it may seem a waste of money for some people, I can tell you that we've had incidents as recent as last year in New Jersey where we had a parent irate show up at the school demanding that their daughter be released to them so that they could take her home. If that person had access to the building, I have no doubt that that individual would have been inside the building in no time trying to get his daughter. It took a while to find the daughter. She was out on the athletic field during gym. She had to come in. They had to find her, bring her in, let her get changed. About 5 minutes after that father left the school with that child, the police department called and asked if she was in the building, at which point they said, no, we just released her to her father. The response to that was to notify the school that that parent had just killed his wife, just killed the daughter's mother, okay? We need an opportunity and an ability to get our people in and out of our building through one central point, and controlling them is critical to understanding what goes on in our school. If we have multiple entrances, if we don't have a way to stop visitors, then we don't have an ability to control who comes in our building. I had a similar circumstance last year. I visited a school in North Jersey. They hit the buzzer. I walked into the building. There was no vestibule. The main office was around the corner. When I pointed out the vulnerability that came with that, the school informed me that in the preceding month they had a parent show up for a conference because their child was being bullied. When they walked into the building, who do you think walked across the hallway right in front of that parent but the bully? At which point the parent attacked that student and ended up with assault charges. So, absent a control vestibule, it becomes very difficult to maintain control of who comes in our building. If it affords us the opportunity to do some other things, to make sure that we get proper identification, that people are escorted where they go instead of walking into our buildings and wandering around. To me, it is an expense that I'd rather not have to address, but it is a very critical component of a security feature for any establishment, really, but schools in particular. We know that parents take advantage of this all the time. We're the ones that are guilty. And your school's not trying to protect anybody from you per se, but we have to get that threat to stand out and be deterred and delayed and identified. And the vestibules provide the best means that we have of doing that.
Thank you. Thank you. Another very specific question that was submitted, and Mr. Saporito, if you could address this, please. Perhaps first, a brief description of what lobby guard is, and then the question in particular is, has the district considered a system similar to lobby guard identification systems used by other school districts?
Sure, thank you, Mrs. Wilson. I think it's important, before I get to that specific question, to expand just a little bit on what Mr. Gale just said. About 3 weeks ago, I got a call in my office that there was an irate parent at one of our elementary schools. At the time, all the campus police officers were on different assignments. Cherry Hill Police were called. They were there instantly. The gentleman that was upset was, for lack of a better term, trapped in the security vestibule at this school. I was watching it on the cameras live. I could tell he was trying to find a way to get in that school. He wanted to pick up his daughter. And most of the time, the intentions are pure. Other times, they're not. And I don't know what this was going to be. Chief Monaghan's officers got there, handled as professional as always. And after a little bit of bantering back and forth, he left and did not come back. I have no doubt that if that lobby, if that vestibule was not there and not secure, that he would have made a scene, and that would have been a lot bigger of an incident than it ended up being. And I think no matter what anybody thinks about it, when you see it in practice and in action, I don't think there's any more proof that anybody needs about that. Now, get to Mrs. Wilson's question about the lobby guard. The short answer is yes. We have looked at it. Myself, Assistant Principal Papa, and from Cherry Hill East, and somebody else from Cherry Hill East. We went down to Timber Creek High School and looked at their system, and I don't remember, I don't think it was lobby guard. Lobby guard is one specific vendor or one specific product by a vendor. There are many out there. They do different things on different levels. Some scan the license, like you have the barcode in the back of your license, and you get certain information back. Some are deeper than others. Most of them only use open source information. There's nothing that's coming back from the state police data systems. That's not being tapped by these systems. Now, when we went and looked at that particular system, it was unimpressive. Maybe it works for them, and it's a very large high school. There were 3 of us, 2 of us that wouldn't scan the license. So we had to manually input all the information in order to get the information back that you would get. And probably it took 15 minutes in the lobby. Now, Cherry Hill East High School on any day, I don't want to put out a number, but there's a lot of people that go in there. And if the system that we look at, or if there's a system there that's not functioning properly, it's going to be a mess. And could we continue to look? Yes. I've been in touch with Haddonfield. We have a contact in Haddonfield that they just bought something. They're going to install. It's not installed yet. Once it gets installed, we're going to follow up with them and see if that particular system works better. But that is the use of these systems is to see if there are any particular issues with the person that's coming in your building. In a different path, there should not be all that many people coming into our buildings that we don't know. Now, I understand that people we know could also have something in their background that we don't know about. I understand that. Anybody coming into our schools is either coming in for a child, and they're not getting into the building if they're not picking up a child unless they have a verified appointment with somebody in the school. So do I think it would be an asset? Yes, but I also want to make sure that we spend our money as best as possible and get the best possible solution that we can get for that. And that's what we'll be working on in the future. Thank you.
We're going to shift a little bit and take the next 5 or 6 questions that pertain particularly to student-level questions, topics, and family-level questions and topics. And as we do that, if you in the audience have a particular question that you would like to see addressed this evening, and you'd like to place it on an index card and hold that index card up, someone will come to collect it from you. Thanks. So, Mrs. DiStefano, if we could turn back to the students who are in your care and charge across the district. We see children certainly with very special needs, and especially in terms of when there's a drill. Are district staff trained to accommodate students who are anxious or have other special needs, especially during emergency drills?
Yes, and that's a very good question because we do get that often. How are our teachers trained? All of our teachers are trained on emergency procedures for all of our classrooms. The special education teachers do have support from the related services. So the behaviorists, speech, occupational therapists that work with the students and the teachers, they will work with the teachers to support the students' specific needs related to their disability. So typically they'll practice these drills within their classroom individually, like each teacher will do that, and then they will go back with the behaviorists and or the therapists and reflect on how to help that student with coping skills and strategies to help them through the drills. So we do have support, and they do, we do practice them specifically with that population.
And with 11,000 pupils, this is not a handful of children. This is really well planned and orchestrated to make sure that children get the supports they need. Thanks. Dr. Green, when we think about what parents can do, the kind of conversations and guidance that they can offer their children when they talk about safety and security issues, what are your top recommendations for us as parents?
So as parents, I think generally to keep open communication about what's going on in their lives So there are a variety of factors that people who do go on, for students who do go on to commit acts of violence, there are some factors that are common to them, though most people who, for example, bullying, most people who engage in these sort of low-frequency but devastating acts of violence in schools tend to have been bullied as a group. But most people who are bullied do not then go on to commit acts of violence. But still, it makes it important to assess, to just speak with your child about the extent to which they may be bullied, or what is going on with their peers, or even if they are engaging in bullying behaviors. And then other factors like, the extent to which they are, how are they feeling in terms of mood? Are they, one thing I think that gets ignored sometimes when we think about violence, we forget to think about the violence that sometimes people exact on themselves. And sometimes when a person is sort of disinhibited with the idea that, hey, I'm not going to be around, that could be something that activates them toward violence toward another. So keeping open communication about how kids are doing, the extent to which they're suicidal, or how are they doing socially. I mean, obviously, a time of adolescence is a time when the peer group is of paramount importance. So how are they doing in that? And those are some of the things that I think that in a forum like this, we talk about things rightly that schools and districts can do, but there are a lot of things that we can do at home that can be sort of early detection, but also early intervention, just by having a conversation about how someone is doing, or letting them know that you are there to support them. And then sometimes when kids are really dealing with symptoms of mental illness, to then bring in professionals, or even, speak to teachers, keep everyone involved, because it's a joint effort, and we all benefit from those joint efforts.
In specific, Mrs. DiStefano, what can parents do? Who should they contact if they have a concern about their child experiencing depression or demonstrating behaviors about which they're concerned?
So as you stated before, on the table out front, I had put together just a small visual of what services are pretty much at each level. But we do have guidance services, K to 12 and pre-K. The guidance counselors are always a great source to get in touch with, especially if you just want to run something by them, or this is what you're seeing, or, at home, and, you just need a little bit of advice. The nurses, too, are also great assets for us. At the middle school level, there's guidance services, and then there's student assistance counselors. So we have student assistance counselors in 3 of our middle schools, and we are an extra support to guidance, but our job is basically social and emotional support for students. So we're there to help not just the students, but the families also. And then at the high school level, you'll have guidance services, student assistance services, and then the student advocates we also have. So there's a student advocate at East and West. They also liaison down to the middle schools and the elementary schools if their services are needed. And the advocates act like the student assistance counselors, where they can help with families and help support students in our schools. There's a multitude of different other programs that are going on in our schools, and I had put them on the handout also. But really, I feel like if I get parent phone calls a lot, and I appreciate those, because really sometimes they just want information, and we're happy to help. We're happy to help in any way we can. And if we don't know the answer, we'll surely try to get it, and we'll also help with outside referrals if needed.
Thank you. Mr. Saporito, on 2 other points that might be a little more direct here, just back to evacuation plans, are there modifications for students with special needs for ADA compliance?
Ideally, we like to keep everybody in the building. Obviously, fire alarms, fire alarm activations, fire drills, and evacuations, whether real or drills, need to be practiced, and they are. For ADA, there's only a couple of schools in the district that have upper floors. serviced by elevators during a fire alarm or during any sort of fire event, those elevators become inoperable. We're not using them. They get recalled to the ground floor so that the fire department can use them. We've trained for this. Is the plan itself modified? No. The bottom line is everybody has to get out of the building. There are different ways to do it. If we're talking about a non-fire event, an evacuation of the building for some sort of other, like a bomb threat or something along those lines, where it's not a fire event, of course, the elevators can be used, get everybody down to the first floor and get them out. If it is a fire event, and we have to get the kids that can't get out, that are immobile or in wheelchairs, there's specific equipment that the school has from the upper floors that actually take them down the steps. I don't know if I would want to be in it when it happens, but it's there, and it's of course an extreme circumstance. The Cherry Hill Fire Department has instant response to the schools when that happens. They're a tremendous organization that we work well with, that the police department works well with. Chief Callan and his staff that I've trained with, the police department trained with, they would be there to help also any sort of ADA issue to get anybody out of the building that needs to get out in a timely manner.
Thank you. So there are many, many vendors across the nation who are approaching schools on an hourly basis. And I wonder, Mr. Tully, if you could just help us think about how the district should distinguish between kind of needed and effective security solutions, especially when we're bombarded by so many pitches for products.
Yes, I think that starts with a sound risk analysis of the district, as well as a security assessment. And if you compare the results of those studies to the state requirements and national best practices, it becomes very clear what are necessary and what are, I like to say, what are wants and what are needs, along with what are frivolous products. And we've all seen some products out there that may be frivolous products. We've seen some products out there that people, that school districts have gone out and purchased in mass, door barricading devices and such that are actually against NFPA 3000, against fire codes, and actually illegal to install in schools. So I think really the bottom line is that if a district does its due diligence and does a risk analysis of the district and has a security assessment, the remediations to issues that are found in those studies will identify the products and the needs for that district. So when these frivolous products come up, or these unnecessary products, or potentially illegal products come up, it's very easy to discern between those and the ones that are necessary.
And in specific, Mr. Saporito, just a very quick overview. The question was asked, has the district considered metal detectors? And I wonder if there's been discussion about that.
Metal detectors are not really something that is practical in our setting. They are very labor intensive. You see it when you go to the airport and you see TSA. How many people, TSA officers, are surrounding that area where the metal detector is? And I mean, I know there's other components to it, but there's a lot of people there. Every time the metal detector goes off, that person would have to be pulled to the side, have to go to a certain area, and have to figure out what is setting off the metal detector. There is time. There's, Jen, 2,200 kids in East. Getting 2,200 kids through a metal detector, if nobody set it off, I would imagine would still be a considerable amount of time. If 2% set it off, it's going to push that time even further back. Other than the main entrance where the kids would be coming in with metal detectors, if they were there, specifically at Cherry Hill East, there's 58 other doors. To try to even begin to have a metal detector at the front door when there are so many other ways that contraband weapons can get inside a school is just not practical in our circumstance.
Thank you. So, Mr. Gale, I wonder if you could just step back for a minute and think about all the topics that have been on the table this evening and make your recommendations for how parents can really be a part of this safety and security plan for the school district and with the school district.
Okay, so my girls are out of high school now, they're in college. I've been in your shoes, I know what it looks like. I used to drop my daughter off at high school, and I'm an idiot. I used to call school the smart box, and I would tell her, go roll around and see if anything sticks to you today. But I always expected her to come back in one piece. And I always also recognized what my part in that was. I used to get highly frustrated with the fact that my children's high school permitted parents to show up at lunchtime with sushi, Panera, it didn't matter what it was. There was a flood of parents at the main door waiting to get in to deliver lunch to their kids. And you probably figured out I drank from a garden hose and I ate grilled cheese sandwiches every day, right? But as a parent, what we have to really think about are a couple of things. Number one, what is our involvement on our campus? What are our expectations? What do we really need in the way of visiting our school? Because whenever we do that, we put a burden on the school to deal with us and to try to sort out what our intentions are, whether we belong there. And that kind of attaches even back to the vestibule issue. The San Bernardino school shooting about a year and a half ago in California, an estranged husband walked into the main office, signed the log, and walked down the hall and shot and killed his estranged wife and also one student and wounded another one for A, the lack of a retention vestibule, and B, for being permitted into the building because he was somebody that they were familiar with and whom they knew. It's very important for us to understand as parents that when we walk up to the door of a school, nobody knows what baggage we're bringing with us, okay? The people that are going to attack you in life, 91% of the time in any physically violent attack, and especially with regard to a large-scale attack, is going to be someone you know. They're going to have an attachment to you or to your facility. And so every time we visit our school, it's a great idea, and it's something we propose and have for years, a visitor policy. Please let us know you're coming so that we avoid that parent that's showing up to pick up the daughter after he killed the wife. So that we don't not anticipate that individual, and we have a means to deal with them. Making sure that our kids actually take the things to school with them that they're supposed to take to school with them so that we don't have to visit unnecessarily. Those are really kind of low-level things, in my opinion, but they're things that we should be doing. We should expect to show up with identification. The threat is not, so we need to make that threat stand out. We need to do our little part in following our policies and procedures that our school has set in place to keep our kids safe. It's not to keep them safe from you. It's to help to detect, deter, and delay that potential threat. And the more we don't adhere to those simple things that are really being asked of us, if we think about it, the harder we're making that job to keep our own kids safe. And I think we can't lose sight of that. The other thing that I would say is this, and it's been touched on a couple times at different ends of the table. Do we really understand our kids? Do we really know what's going on with our children? Are we paying attention to what their online footprint looks like? Do we recognize our ability to help our kids without being the helicopter parents or the road graders that we talk about now, right? Our kids can't take a nick, they can't take a bump. We have to jump in the way and protect them from everything. And as a result, when you do studies of people that engage in school violence, what you find are that these people have some commonalities. They have some common traits and characteristics. They externalize blame. Everything is someone else's fault. They have trouble, they're referred to as awkward and incompetent joiners. They have trouble reading body language, social cues. They don't fit in. They have issues that put them in what's referred to our pathway behaviors. I have a whole hour and a half that I could do for you on that right now. But the bottom line is that there are common behaviors. There's an identified pathway to violence, and movement on that scale can be seen by anybody who has connection with these individuals, whether they're your kids or whether they're somebody else in your life. And we need to do a better job of recognizing some of those things and getting people around us help when they need it. I was very impressed when we had our first pre-meeting and I talked to Jen and I said, one of the things, New Jersey, and Dr. Green will probably appreciate this, we just got $1 million grant for constructing threat assessment teams and training schools on threat assessment, that process of identifying people that should eventually be referred to someone like you to assess dangerousness. And what I learned was, one of the things that I'm trying to roll into this is mental health screening, which is being done in your district. everybody has this idea that mental illness is something way off the scale, and it's not. And the sooner we identify the potential for our children to fall on a scale where they need some type of help, the sooner we can help them to assimilate and have a normal life and engage properly, rather than continue to compound their problems. And we as parents, especially my generation, are very guilty, I believe, of making sure that our kids have someone else to blame for everything that goes wrong in their life. That we make sure that we don't let anybody identify that they have any kind of a weakness, because we don't want the stigma of needing help. Those things are available, and they're very critical to making sure that we keep our own kids safe, along with everybody around them. I think it's really important for us to understand that and to be part of that process, recognizing behaviors, paying attention to these pathway behaviors. And if you could do one thing, take this thing. So adolescents, there was a study just came out. Take this away from a child, an adolescent child, for 2 weeks, and their ability to empathize increases 80%. Kids don't talk to each other. They don't read body language. They don't interact the way that we did when we were kids. This makes it very hard for us to read how we're being perceived by the rest of the world, right? You have to get you got to get the happy smiley face or the LOL, or it's all capitals. That's what they understand. So we as parents have to do our job to make sure that we're giving them tools to really succeed, and that when we see some of these behaviors, that we're there to help them along and to seek the help that's being offered by your district to make sure that we get them back on the right path before they start to get frustrated with their issues and potentially lash out in different ways and hopefully never get to that point of extreme violence.
Thank you. So there are several questions from the audience. So if our panel members could help each other in answering, but I'll try to direct them to the right people to begin with. And the first one, I think, Dr. Green, you might have to point us to other resources, but your initial response, has there been any study correlating mental health medication to increase risk of suicide or violence? It's a very specific question. You might want us to refer us. Yes. Has there been any study correlating mental health medication to increased risk of suicide or violence?
There may be. I'm not aware of a specific study that showed that correlation, but there may be. Whoever asked that question may be aware of one that I'm not.
Thank you. Mr. Saporito, how many hours of training have the district's police officers had on interacting with children and adolescents, and interacting with youth with emotional and behavioral challenges? So specifically training with adults, children, youth who are experiencing emotional and behavioral challenges.
It's a great question.
I don't think it's specific about the number of hours, but is that a piece of the training?
Absolutely. Chief Monaghan, in-service training has different topics, and I believe at least the last 3 years they've been some sort of component of that in the training. Also, there is a training series that's put on by the New Jersey State Police called CLEAR, and it deals with not only special needs, but it deals with sexual assault victims, deals with domestic violence victims, which there can be in schools. It can be unintended consequences to children when they see parents involved in domestic violence. And that every officer has been through that CLEAR training. It's mandated by the prosecutor's office, and all 9 officers have been through that CLEAR training. And like I said, it's different levels of things that are not mainstream, behaviors that aren't mainstream. And it's any time that comes up, we send our officers to it.
Thank you.
You're
And
welcome.
Mrs. DiStefano, on a similar point, are teachers trained to spot troubled behavior from a child, and what kind of training do they get?
So the teachers are trained yearly, like a refresher training, basically just to remind them of at-risk behaviors, factors that are coming in, any type of at-risk behaviors that they might think that they want to discuss with the counselors. So they are trained to be able to have signs and symptoms, new teacher training also, and also substitute training. So those substitutes that are coming into our buildings also are trained. A lot of that is done through the harassment, intimidation, and bullying training, and we do talk about signs and symptoms, but specifically for kids that are exhibiting any type of behaviors and how to report it and what to do.
Thank you. We have to remember that in a district of this scale, there are dozens of substitutes on a daily basis who have to be aligned with these protocols and training as well.
Yeah, there is a state mandate for every 5 years. The teachers are mandated to have suicide prevention training.
Yes.
So not only do we do that every 5 years, but we also do it yearly. And that's also with the new teachers, and then refreshers for the staff every year.
Thank you. So I think, Mr. Gale, this might be one for you to field. In addition to the fast police response time, can the panel or anyone else on the panel share your opinions on arming and training faculty staff to secure schools?
I can tell you that won't ever happen in New Jersey. To get a permit to carry is almost entirely reserved for law enforcement. I don't think that you'll ever see a law in New Jersey that permits a teacher to be armed, if that's what you're referring to, out in the crowd. I can tell you, and I'm sure that others up here that have carried a weapon for a living can tell you that even highly trained people make mistakes. When you handle a weapon every single day with all the intense training that we were put through during our careers, the possibility for a mistake in someone that has not undergone a lifetime of training in handling a firearm would concern me in a school setting. And when I heard this starting to be proposed, if you raised your hand and said it's a 2.5-hour response time to our school for law enforcement, I would say I might change my mind on this a little bit. But I started doing some research on this topic, and what I found were a lot of accidental discharges in schools by teachers that were carrying weapons. So that was kind of the start of my education on what that might look like in a school, and to me it's highly concerning. But I don't think you'll ever see a law where teachers are afforded the ability to carry a firearm in New Jersey.
If I could just add to that, Mrs.
Please.
Wilson. Yeah, I think if you look at any of the jobs that we all do on a daily basis, we are what we are. Teachers teach, police officers are police officers, doctors are doctors. You do your job, and that's your core competency. Teachers' core competency is not necessarily security, although security is everybody's job. And training for that, to see what may be amiss in the school is one thing, but to react to it with a weapon is a whole different ballgame. Carrying a weapon takes thousands, hundreds and thousands of hours of training to do it right, and certainly to do it in a crowded school. As I stated earlier, several of us on the stage have been on our respective departments' SWAT teams for many years, and with the number of rounds fired, the number of hours we spent training, I would never want to be in that situation, to be pulling a weapon out in a classroom full of kids or in a hallway full of kids, even though I trained exclusively to do that for many, many years. So being that it's not somebody's core competency, I would agree with Mr. Gale and say that that is not something that should happen ever.
Let's see who would like to field this from the panel. It comes from the audience as well. I'm concerned by the constant posting of our school's vulnerable areas on social media. How can we prevent a tragedy when there are district videos of our schools? Make us more vulnerable?
Well, if nobody else is going to jump up, I'll take a stab and say that I don't know what the agenda of somebody that might post those things might be. Stopping it might have a lot to do with what the motivation for somebody posting those things are. If somebody makes posts like that with the intent to highlight a vulnerability, expecting that it's going to go away and have good intentions, I would say that that's not the way to do that, because all you're doing is creating more of a problem. And in some cases, a vulnerability might be exposed that is not going to be easily or quickly rectified. So if the intent is to try to make things better, I would argue that there's a way to do that with the district without doing it in front of the general public. So if that strikes a nerve, then maybe somebody who's doing that could do it in a different way without putting it out on the social media or the internet, wherever it's finding its way. If somebody is doing this because they have another intention, I'm not sure what you can do to stop that. You know, we do what we can do. Where we spend our money and how we address school security issues is something that's very difficult. And, you know, everybody has this opinion that, you know, I saw this vulnerability, we need to spend money on it and fix it right away. And the reality is that situation might not be as easily resolved. If my wife was driving a car that really needed to be replaced and I couldn't afford to replace it, it doesn't mean I don't stop changing the oil for $19 every 3,000 miles. I still have to do what I can do. I might not be able to afford that new car. So, you know, just posting something like that for the world to see, it might not be something that's going away anytime soon, and all you've done is created further risk.
Thank you.
Can I touch on that as well?
Please, please, Chief.
You know, Mr. Gale touched on it earlier where he showed his phone and spoke about, you know, the LOLs or the smiley face emojis. And unfortunately, in our society, through the use of social media, we kind of judge ourselves or try to judge ourselves on the number of likes that we get on Facebook and the comments that we get on Facebook. And negativity sells, unfortunately. Something negative can go viral in a matter of seconds, and people feel empowered by putting negative things online and then getting these likes and comments, and it makes them feel, you know, like they're the bigger person. And, you know, it doesn't take much effort to put something negative online and then have it go crazy and have everyone comment on it. But it does take a lot of energy to put yourself into a positive situation and try and be constructive in how you deal with a situation and how you deal with something that you might see as a security flaw and bring it forward in a constructive and a positive way. And it's extremely frustrating for me in my position to deal with that negativity online and people who come out and represent themselves as so-called experts and at times put the safety of the student population, the staff population, and our officers at risk when they're putting these things out there in the general public for no good whatsoever other than to get this negative chatter online. So it doesn't, in my opinion, serve any purpose to put that out there. We are very open and transparent, as is exhibited here with this panel. The police department is open, the school district is open, and, you know, our main goal is the safety of the student population, the staff population, and the population that lives and comes into this town. We're all husbands, wives, uncles, fathers, you know, mothers. We have children of our own, and I can assure you that our main goal is the safety and security of your children. We don't want to see anything negative happen to anyone that comes into these schools, that comes into this town. We would be devastated if something negative would happen. We put our hearts and souls into trying to protect the students and staff that are in these schools. And, you know, we try and follow the best practices. We try and follow the proper protocols. Are we perfect? Absolutely not. But I can tell you that what we do each and every day is 150% in the best interest of the students that are in this district. Thank you.
Ms. Wilson, I'm sorry, I think something very important that has to be
Please.
pointed out here with that particular question, and it ties in with Dr. Green and what Mr. DiStefano had said and had talked about, and it's written down, and it was a specific question. What can parents do to keep your children safe? If you have children in the school district, you're a parent of children in the school district, and the best course of action for you is to post, as Mr. Gale said, a vulnerability. I fail to see the logic in that. And I don't want to be blunt, and I don't mean to be dismissive, but it goes against everything that you would want. Chief Monaghan is 100% correct. Every day we step foot in the building, every day the campus police officers, every Cherry Hill police officer, every staff member, teacher, and administrator, the number one goal, and Dr. Malash has said it over and over again, is the safety and well-being of the children and the staff. Because if the kids and the staff aren't safe, everything else doesn't fall into place. The education piece doesn't follow. So I don't get the logic of anybody that would put anything online, irregardless of whether you have a child or children in the district. I think that just exasperates it more. Thank you.
In the few moments that are left, I'd like to invite, but not certainly require, if any of the panelists has a point that you brought in that you want to be sure gets across in this format, remembering that this is also live streamed and will be archived for others to look at over time, so that other people will have more access to it. So if there's a point that you'd like to make or a closing statement, that a topic that you know should be conveyed to the audience, I'd open the floor to you, Dr. Green.
So, I would just like to make the point before we end here that everyone here is here for the right reasons, in that you care about the safety and security of everyone here and the kids. And I think that some of the things that go on, and I guess that was one example of it, when folks post things or whatever. I mean, I get the sense that what they're trying to do is take their anxiety about things. And I mean, it's scary to feel like I let my kids go and then I have no control over what happens next. And so then people engage in a variety of behaviors that then make them feel like they have some control over the outcome. And sometimes those things aren't helpful. So I guess what I would say is, rather than think about the unlikely events that could occur, but that happen seldom, that I think all of our attention, to the extent that we can focus it on the things that are more likely to happen and do cause harm, that it doesn't make the national news when a kid is bullied or socially isolated or is hurting. But there are a lot of kids who are going through things out there, be it from their own genetic vulnerabilities, conflict that's going on in their home, pressures from various places, that those kids are out there, and they're your kids and they're my kids. And the more that we can focus on those real and present issues and the harm they cause, the better we'll all be in the long run. Thanks.
Thank you. Any other pressing point, Mr. Tully?
I don't know if it's pressing, but I just wanted to kind of leave everybody with a couple things to think about. One, we talk about security, and I know everybody's worried about the active shooter. Everybody's worried about people winding up maimed or injured or killed. Security is not just for active shooters. Security in schools, in businesses, in life is for other things as well. You have to think about other things that can happen in schools: burglaries, thefts, domestic violence, non-custodial parental abductions. Happens more often than active shooters, tenfold. Simple property destruction, graffiti. Security is all of those things combined. And I think that's something to keep in mind, that we're not just trying to secure our children, our staff, and our community against an active shooter, which, as we've heard tonight, is a very unlikely event. We're trying to secure our schools, our children, our staff, and our community against many, many other things by putting some of these measures into place. Also, be aware that, I mentioned it very quickly, but, security is everybody's business. And I think we can all do a better job, the district, parents, everybody can do a better job of educating those who, fall within our realm about security, and that, we hear it all the time: see something, say something. It's real. It's real. If you notice things when you're dropping your children off at school, they just look out of place. Because I can come in this district, several other of us at this table who aren't in this district very often can come in here and see the same thing you see, and it doesn't seem out of place to us. Where you see it every day at the elementary school, at the middle schools, at the high schools, these gentlemen see it every day. It's out of place to you. It's your job, and it's incumbent upon you to say something and to educate. It's incumbent upon the district to educate the children at age-appropriate levels to do the same thing, to educate them on safety and security. And it's your job to educate your children at home about that. So I just wanted to kind of leave everybody with that. And just think one more quick thing. If you compare school violence and deaths with school violence, injuries with school violence, to fire-related deaths and injuries, just think about that for a minute. There hasn't been a fire-related death in the United States in over 50 years. And why is that? It's because of regulations, it's because of standards, it's because of expenditures of money, it's because of inspections, it's because of funding, available funding, it's because of drills and exercises. If we put 1/100th of the money into school security, and I'm talking about as a society, not as a district, as a society, as we do into fire prevention in schools and in businesses, we wouldn't see as much of the violence as we do in schools today. So, very much appreciate being invited to participate tonight, and I want to thank everybody for coming out.
Any other point to be made before we close this evening?
Yeah, I'll just close out with a couple things. I think that it's really important for, and Dennis kind of just touched on this, gone are the days where we should ever expect that somebody else has our safety and security in mind for us, first and foremost. When my girls were little and they get upset about something, I would tell them, listen, I'll do my part to try to keep you happy, but ultimately there's one person responsible for your happiness, and it's not me. You can figure out who it is. The same goes for security. And, you know, we all have to contribute to the security of our school environment. It is not somebody's job. It is not one of those things where we look at our district and say, you know, this is your ultimate, you know, whatever's going on, I don't like, deal with it. We have our own way to contribute to that. Part of it is by our own actions and behaviors. How we teach our kids to deal with authority becomes very, very important during emergencies. And so I think that we need to recognize what our roles are collectively and to recognize things and report things and to do it appropriately, not put it all over the internet, but to have a legitimate conversation with somebody and point out something that they might not be aware of that can address a security concern. But the most important thing I think we can do is really, we lose sometimes sight of the fact that we need to model the behaviors we expect from our kids. You know, we're looking to build schools that are areas where social and emotional engagement is collectively respectful. You know, we have issues with bullying, and then we maybe think back to how we conduct ourselves in phone conversations or with people that we don't like. And, you know, are we actually teaching our kids to be inclusive, to be respectful, or are we showing them a different side? We can't expect anybody to behave differently in any environment if they're modeling their behavior after us, whether it's following security protocols or whether it's following, you know, just how we conduct ourselves in life. And I don't say that as somebody who's perfect in any means, but this is an important enough topic that I never thought in my life I would be doing this for a living. But if I'm going to do it, I've gone to over 100 trainings on this across the country for my own education. I've interacted with the principal from Columbine, survivors from Virginia Tech, the SRO from Arapahoe, the father who lost his daughter informed I love you guys from Platte Canyon. And what you'll find is that what we're doing here and what your school is falling in line with and is doing even before we set foot in the door really does have your kids' best interest at heart. These people that have learned these lessons the hard way, we've taken those lessons and we've tried to translate that for our schools. There's no end to the trainings. All the resources of my office are behind every school in this state, including this district. And I could take 15 minutes to talk to you about all the initiatives we have that touch on all the things that we're doing. But when I came down here and started the conversation about what tonight was going to be about, I found so many of those things in place already. And I didn't even get to ask questions about a lot of them that have come up tonight. So I think you should feel good collectively as parents. You should understand that this is a process. It's not a goal, and you run across the finish line and we say, we're done with this, you know, let's sell the district to another school. That's not how this works. So you're all part of that process. I thank you for giving us the time, listening to me rant. I appreciate it, but the only reason that we're here is because your district is taking this seriously and is trying to do the right things for your kids. So thank you.
Well, on behalf of the district and the greater community, I do thank each of you for the work you do daily in association with our Cherry Hill students and residents and also in your wider communities, and especially for spending this time with us this evening and really enlightening us and helping us consider our future decisions. It's very greatly appreciated. Thank you.